So welcome, good evening. I'll say that some of you know me, I used to chair this and I haven't done it for a while now, so forgive me if I'm a bit out of practice. The other day, I had one of those nights where, you don't go to sleep and you think you're going to finish the internet in that one night, and, I started digging into some old French archives, looking for my great-great-grandfathers, and, it turned out, it might not even be him, it might be just a guy who had the same surname, but I found out that my great-grandfather, whom I was never met, had fought in a lot of these French wars, and had also sort of had a medal of war and all those things. And it's just stuff that I found in some old French newspapers from God knows when, like 1920s, 1910, all that sort of stuff, Indochina wars and all that stuff. I know it's interesting because it's never thought about it, never looked into that stuff, never seen any paperwork related to that. So it's really interesting to have this talk today with all of these guns in front of me. The talk today, as you know from the description, is about the World Wars Muslim Memorial Trust. And some of you have been to the Paris Mosque. Have anybody seen the Paris Mosque? It's a beautiful mosque, if you ever get a chance. So one of the sort of part of the story of how the mosque was built was a lot of the people who fought for the French, initially the Senegalese who were part of the French Foreign Legion. When they went back, the French government wanted to reward them, and they said, what do you want? And they were smart enough to say, oh, we want a mosque. And then they brought this quite astute French architect who used the North African style and built that mosque that many of you would have visited. And if you haven't had a chance, please do. And there's sort of in the corner of the courtyard, there's a little memorial for a lot of the regiments that fought on the side of the French. The other also thing that I thought about when I thought about this, a few years ago, I know that 3-4 years ago, and again, so I apologize if it's more towards the link between North Africa and France, because that's what I know more of, and our distinguished speakers will tell us more about sort of the links in Southeast Asia. There was a movie that had quite an impact. It was called in French Indigènes, or the Indigenous. I think in English it was Days of Glory, and it was about all these Arabs who fought in the Second World War, particularly when they put them on the front line in the Alsace and Lorraine, and brought back Alsace and Lorraine to French control. And right after, there was quite a reaction. What the French did after that was sort of started paying their dues to a lot of these people and their families. It's quite a massive thing that happened in France, but it's quite interesting, the reaction to it. And later on we can talk about some of the other side effects to that as well. So, the World War Muslim Memorial Trust is to honor these Muslim soldiers from the Indian Subcontinent and elsewhere in the Middle East and North Africa who served with Britain and its allies in the two world wars. The first objective of the memorial is to honor the 400,000 Muslim men in the subcontinent who fought World War I. The World Wars Muslim Trust is an initiative led by Tazi Husain, who we're lucky that he's joining us today, a retired NHS consultant surgeon, inspired by Nottingham GP, Dr. Irfan Malik, who both felt that the ongoing Centenary commemoration of World War I and the contribution of the Indian subcontinent, in particular of Muslim soldiers, had been largely forgotten, and they would like to have that remembered as it should. And as always, I must also add, Tazi will be joined by Jahan Mahmood to my left, a military historian and counter-extremism specialist with representations and some countering viewpoints on the subject. Let me just introduce our speakers quickly and leave it to them. Tazi Husain, to far left, is a retired NHS urological surgeon. He designed and led setting up the memorial to honor the many women secret agents flown out to resistant movements in occupied Europe through the World War II, one of whom was Noor Inayat Khan. Jahan Mahmood, my left, taught history at the University of Birmingham from 2003 to 2009 and is a military historian and counter-extremism specialist. He has advised the Home Office and the Royal Military Academy of Sandhurst, and you might have seen him on television talking about security matters and present-day military campaigns. Without further ado, I'll pass you to Tazi.
Thank you very much, Sid. It's a great honor to be here in the Singh Circle. And I'm going to take you on a personal journey of discovery of the history of the First War. Now, I would have to say I'm not a historian, and Jahan here is going to tell me where I go wrong wherever.
I'll try.
My journey started in this little thatched cottage in a little village in Bedfordshire called Thamesford, and my home for about 20 years. And it was only after I retired about 6 years ago that I discovered the history of this little parish. And I discovered that during World War II, there was a very secret wartime airfield just across the A1 road, the Great North Road, and the main railway north. Now it is converted to being a farm. Delving more into the history, I discovered that during the war, 1940, I think it was set up, 1941, 44, it operated very secretly and only with the purpose of flying supplies and secret agents to resistance movements in occupied Europe. And they only operated on full moon nights, and during the day and during the other nights, nothing seemed to happen there, and the villagers didn't even know what the purpose of the airfield was. During the war, it was taken over, largely directed, all the operations, by something called the Special Operations Executive, a secret agency set up by Churchill, which rivaled SIS, Special Intelligence Service, and MI5, with the sole purpose of setting Europe ablaze. That's what Churchill said. And they operated from what was called Gibraltar Farm, which was on the airfield at the time. And the only building remaining now is this barn there, and inside the barn are still shells and brick layouts. And it was here that secret agents were kitted out with their parachutes and their weapons and money wherever they were going, France, Belgium, Holland, and also very special lethal cyanide film to take if, in case they got caught and they wanted to obliterate themselves. I would have to say that hardly anybody ever used that suicide pill. Inside the barn also is a plaque which commemorates the forces of resistance. But my interest really arose because one of these secret agents was a woman who was called Nurin Naik Khan. And she was the daughter of a Sufi pir who went out from Bhopal, a descendant of Tipu Sultan. And he went first to spread the Sufi message, really. That was his idea. And he landed up first in the United States, and he met a girl and married her, and then he was invited to Moscow, and it was there that Nurin Naik was born, just at the outbreak of, well, just before the outbreak of the First War. And Vilayat Khan was a musician, and Nur Inayat was an expert player of the veena, and would hand a harmonium and would actually teach other children how to play it. And also she wrote some very enthralling little tales for children. Now the family moved to London just before the Nazis invaded and took over Paris. And the father had died by then, and Noor joined the WAF, which was the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, together with her brother who joined the Air Force. And she was recruited by the SOE, this secret agency, because of a wonderful knowledge of French. And she was flown over as a wireless operator to occupied France in June 1943. And only a few months into her going there, in October of that same year, she was captured. And she was treated most brutally, much more brutally than any of the other captured agents, simply because she was most uncooperative, and she was possibly the only agent who was shackled and chained, and she was terribly molested. And in September 1944, she was shot in the back, executed by a shot in the back of the head by this horrible German chap. But I think one of the reasons why she was so badly treated was she was a bit dark, and the Nazis were a bit racist at that time, so she was called the Creole. And this was in fact told to her brother Bilal Khan long after the war had ended. And she was awarded the George Cross. Up to this date, no woman has ever been awarded the Victoria Cross, although some people have fought this for quite a long time. And on the way back, I was driving back from France one day, and I heard that the Princess Royal had unveiled this memorial in Gordon Square Gardens with a bust of Noor Nai. And it sparked me off because I've been doing a lot of reading then of the history, and I discovered that there were lots of other women agents who had not been honoured so like this. And so in Thamesford I set up a trust of fellow helpers, and we designed a memorial to the women's secret agents, just to the women, and I discovered about 70 names, at least the ones we could discover. I did get a lot of flack because some people said, well, why just the women, why not the men? And I said, well, the women weren't supposed to go out and fight, and they did. And these women were really badly, but about a quarter of them didn't come back. And the ones that did kept very quiet, never told anybody about what they had done. And it was fitting that once we set this up, it was unveiled by the Prince of Wales in December 2013. And I actually created that mosaic which we put in the center of the marble slab there, and we got the Prince of Wales to put in the final piece, which actually he was quite enamored with. And one of the names, as you can see on the top there, was Noor Nai Khan. Well, I was drawn after that into the First World War memorial of the village, which was pretty dirty. And I therefore undertook with our trust to have it renovated, cleaned up, and then relocated. And this didn't win everybody's approval because nobody wanted it moved. So I started then on learning about the history of the First War, because when we had it dedicated on the beginning of the centenary of the start of the Great War, on the 4th of August 1914, well, 1914 is when it started, and it was 2014 when we rededicated this memorial. And that same night, there was a service in Westminster Abbey, and 4 celebrities were chosen, especially to snuff out candles in the Abbey. And one of those selected was Baroness Wolsey. And I saw in the Spectator magazine Charles Moore, a very respected journalist, who wrote, "Why Lady Wolsey? Her prominence," he said, "fell below the level of events." And I realized then how little most people knew about the Indian subcontinent participation in the Great War. And I was a bit annoyed, so I wrote back to the Spectator, and they published it 2 weeks later. And I said Baroness Wolsey had been chosen to represent upwards of 1 million men that came out from the Indian subcontinent in the various theatres of the Great War. And I don't think when all these, I don't know how many of you saw these ceramic poppies that were laid out in the grounds of the Tower of London. 880,000, over 880,000 of them. How many in Britain knew that 1 in 12 of those poppies represented one man lost from the Indian subcontinent? And it transpired that only 2% of the British public actually knew, not only that, but that about 1/3 of those men were Muslims, 400,000. And in fact, India sent the largest contingent of all the Commonwealth to help Britain and its allies in the Great War. And the Muslim contribution was a little wider than that. because there was also the contribution of the North African Muslims from Tunisia, Algeria and Morocco, who joined the Free French forces and were therefore on the side of the Allies. So it was quite a large contribution. And from India itself, not only did men come out, but there was a lot of money. In terms of today's value, about 20 billion pounds sterling was contributed by the Indian government to the war effort. And more than that, there was 3.5 million tons of supplies, rice, grain, pulses, goats, meat, that were sent out from the Indian subcontinent. And this was at the time, and this went out from the reserves of the mother country. So that later on it transpired, when the monsoon rains failed in 1917, or 1916, I think Jahan will put me right there, there was famine, because there were no reserve supplies left in the stores in India to cope with this. And I think more people died in India during that famine than those who went out to the Western Front or to the other theatres of the war. So the contribution from India was very great. I did a lot of reading, all those books, and I learned that the army in India at the outbreak of the First War was perhaps the largest volunteer army in the world at the time. They weren't men who were fighting for their country. They were men who were there for a purpose. The army in India was composed of not only the Indian army, but there was the British garrison and also then the armies of the princely states. And a total of about 250,000, which Lord Salisbury, one of the ministers, called our barracks in the East. It was reformed by Kitchener, Lord Kitchener, who was a commander-in-chief in India just a few years before the war. But just to give you a breakdown of how Kitchener's reforms reformed the army, was each division, each brigade, each unit had a mixture of men, soldiers from different religions, cultures, background. For example, the Jalandhar Brigade had two British regiments, the Regiment of Pathans, the Regiment of Sikhs, the Regiment of Frontier Force Rifles, and and the Cavalry Brigade was similarly made up of British and Indian regiments. Now, Hodson's Horse, for example, one of the units that came out to the Western Front, was also broken up in ethnic and religious, by religious background. So you had battalions or squadrons of Sikhs, Dogras, Punjabi Muslimans and Pathans. And a lot of these were drawn from what were called the martial races. And the martial races was a theory that actually came out after the Indian Mutiny, or what some of us call the War of Independence of 1857. The martial races were those areas in India that proved loyal to the crown. And they were mainly drawn from the northwestern part of the subcontinent. And a lot of this is now Pakistan, apart from the highlands of Nepal and what is remaining of the Punjab, that is Sikh. And there was a lot of pictorial representation of these so-called martial races that actually persisted in the Pakistan army, I would have to say, even after partition. Because I still remember being told that one Pakistani soldier is equal to 10 Hindus in a mess. But it didn't last for too long. But what made these people join up? Well, I would have to say that, as you can see, this is a photograph of veterans who came back from the First World War to the little village of Dulmiyar that one of my great friends who we together started off this memorial trust has got a historical connection to Dulmiar, who sent out the most men to the First World War and were therefore honoured by that famous Scottish cannon. So it was called the Tuk Balagan. And as you can see, they're all pretty proud. They're swaggering away. So basically what drew them into the army was izzat. Izzat, in other words, pride and their standing in the community. It wasn't just money. It was more than that. Now, immediately after, just a few days after the outbreak of the war started on the 4th of August, 1914, Kitchener mobilized the Indian Expeditionary Forces. And the first one that was mobilized was the 2 infantry divisions and 2 cavalry divisions. And they were called the Indian Expeditionary Force A. And a special message from the King Emperor, George V, was read out to all the soldiers of all the battalions in all those divisions. And it concentrated on my Indian Army and izzat and honour and fame. And as you can see, there were just short of about 1 million men, but it wasn't only France that came to. The expeditionary forces came out to East Africa, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Gallipoli, etc. And they embarked from Bombay and Karachi, and they joined up and crossed the dreaded Kalapani, which was the Indian Ocean, and landed up in Marseille towards the end of September. And this was the Lahore Infantry Division that landed there first. And they were still in their tropical vardi, their uniforms. It was a warm autumn day, and they were sent out to the Western Front at Le Pré in Belgium. And it was here that Khudaydat Khan became the first Indian soldier to be awarded the Victoria Cross. No Indian had ever been awarded this from the Balochi regiment. The morale was very high to start with, but as the cold bit in, it dropped pretty quickly. And when the papers in Britain talked about this, some women got together and put together something called an Indian Soldiers Fund that sent out warm clothes and supplies. And morale then dropped even further when the cold bit in, and especially when the Germans started using chlorine gas. And to start with, the officers told the men, well, you urinate on your puggarees and then you wind it around your face, and the ammonia should be able to keep it off. That was before the gas mask came in. But as you can see from this letter home, morale went right down, and partly this was, and this is epitomized by the 2 Mir brothers of the Frontier Force Rifles. One of them, Amir Das, was awarded the Victoria Cross. His brother led a party of deserters across to the German lines and surrendered. And the reason for that was the German initiative to treat Muslim POWs very differently to other POWs. They were treated well. And this, in fact, was a POW camp near Berlin, and they had a special mosque in the grounds there, a wooden mosque, and a special paper, Hindustan, which came out regularly to the Indian Muslims. And right at the top is a wonderful verse by Allama Iqbal, Sare Jahan se Acha Hamara Hindustan. It concentrated on jihad, because by this time the Ottoman Caliph had joined the Germans. And the first line says, "Tum jante ho ke Germany ke dushman Islam ke bhi dushman hai." So these were the leaflets that were dropped onto the lines and did cause some desertions, but fortunately not very many. Towards the end of 1915, the infantry divisions moved to Mesopotamia, and the war wasn't going very well over there. There was this famous siege of Kut al-Amara in Mesopotamia, which lasted for about 4 months, and all these people starved, and they were captured, treated very badly, and the Muslims found the campaign in Mesopotamia rather difficult. But everything changed in 1916, June 1916, when the Khalifa of Makkah, Sharif Hussein, declared war on the Ottomans. And he was promised a great deal by the residents in Egypt as a reward for this. A second peace was won by Shah Ahmed Khan there, and then Kut al-Amara was recaptured in February that year, and Baghdad a bit later, and Jerusalem in December 1917, and the Ottomans then capitulated about a year later in October 1918. Now back in England, the Indian soldiers...
Can I rush you a bit
were treated most... You want me to stop?
So, yeah, you have about 2 minutes. And then we can use the press.
Okay, I'll go past this. I think I will just say, talk about the memorials. That was the Hindu Chhatri, which was where the Hindus were cremated. Muslims are buried in this ground here, which in fact has been renovated most grandly into a peace garden. And there is the memorial at Neuve Chapelle to the Indians, at least those that have no known grave. But there are also plaques distributed all over Punjab. And this is my brother-in-law, the retired Major General, who's collecting this and hopefully writing up about it. The promise of independence didn't happen because India was promised actually that it would be independent. It didn't happen. And when the Rowlatt Act came in, Muhammad Ali Jinnah resigned, and India didn't have its independence until after the Second World War. Victoria Cross heroes, there was recently a program on Channel 5, and there was not a single Indian Victoria Cross featured there, until Lord Ashcroft, I believe, has quite recently purchased the Victoria Cross and all the medals of Khudidat Khan, which is in his collection now. The Sikhs have a memorial, which is in the National Memorial Arboretum. The French unveiled a memorial to the Muslims at Verdun, which is their longest battle. And we thought we'd do something, and we set up a memorial trust, a Muslim memorial trust, and we hope to set up this memorial to the 400,000 Muslims. And we thought we would stage it in a memorial garden with an Islamic theme. But unfortunately, it might not be cited in the National Memorial Arboretum, because it does seem as if they may not have room. So we are left with considering alternatives. But we still certainly want to do this. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. We'll come back to you. Because I want to allow Jahan to also ample time to sort of share his perspective. Just before we go to you, Jahan, I just want to remind the audience that the event is being live tweeted by the City Circle, #CC Talks, and obviously it's an open platform, so any of you can sort of do that if you wish. Well, we'll allow Jahan to connect.
Hi, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone see my slide on the... Can you see the slide? Okay, brilliant. I think it's important just to recap for the audience the belligerents, the two opposing sides in the First World War. So the Triple Entente, which was constituted by the British Empire, France and Russia, and they were up against the Central Powers that was made up by Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and later the Ottoman Empire. It was difficult for Muslim soldiers fighting for the Indian army because when they heard they were going to be fighting fellow Muslims, it did cause a number of problems, and indeed a rebellion in Singapore in particular. But also it caused problems amongst the ranks of Pathan soldiers, some of whom walked all the way back from Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, to Afghanistan and Pakistan, the northwest frontier province. This picture is really a reminder of what soldiers were going through on the Western Front, in the trenches of France and Belgium. You can see the rather grim expression of this soldier who's carrying the body of his comrade who is badly wounded. He later died and succumbed to his injuries. At this particular moment, the 2nd British Corps is in a very difficult bind. It is up against a far more trained and mechanized German army, which has larger reserves. And unfortunately, because of mounting casualties, Britain is now forced to look abroad. Now, the only other place that actually could produce a regular army or a trained army for Britain was the Indian Army. At first, it didn't go down very well with the British establishment. The establishment didn't want to give brown men the opportunity to fight against whites in Europe, because they were worried that if they do prove victorious, they may go over with that commitment and determination and throw their usurpers in India, so overthrow the colonialists. Why would you want to empower brown men and allow them to feel equal to their fellow whites? However, the king, and this is a picture of King George V, who actually in this picture is wearing a Muslim turban called a kulla. I mean, wouldn't that go down well with the BNP or you know, the EDL or Britain First? You know, probably need 3 months of rehabilitation just to get over the fact that the King Emperor of the Empire, right, the head of the British, is wearing a Muslim turban at a time when Britain was ruling vast parts of the Middle East and indeed other parts of the world. So I brought with me from my collection, this is a kulla. It is distinctly different to the Sikh turban and the Hindu turban. As you can see, it is pointed, and it has its origins in Central Asia. So the Sufi traditions that brought themselves into the Indian subcontinent. So King George, in effect, is wearing a Sufi turban. You might want to share that picture with Prince Charles when but just to move on in regards to the picture itself, is that the king was actually very enamored by the Indians. He wanted the Indians to be given the opportunity to fight on the battlefields of Europe. So he didn't show the kind of disregard and discrimination and bigotry that's shown by the British establishment. Quickly moving on, Indians were initially directed to Egypt, around 28,500 in total. That's where they were on their way to. However, there was a call from the British authorities for them to be redirected to Marseille in south of France, and they docked their ships and disembarked on 28th September, I believe it was, 1914. And there was a combination of cavalry units and infantry units who disembarked. But it's also important to note that not all soldiers, not all individuals that went from India were actually combatants. There was also a large number of non-combatants who had other menial roles in the army. Tazi Husain mentioned the warrior traditions of the Indian subcontinent. Here is a picture or a slideshow of 4 of them. The Pathans, a pre-Islamic warrior tradition, who were not just fighting the British at the time, they were also fighting for the British and fighting themselves, which is well known amongst Pathans because of their, of course, truculent and rambunctious nature. And then you have the Rajputs, and Rajputs tend to be both Muslim and Hindu. It's also, I think it's quite interesting to note that from Punjab, a number of Rajput families fought for Britain free of pay. They just considered it part of an obligation or a part of a contract that they had with the British establishment. The contract was actually quite simple. We will give you the autonomy to rule your areas as long as you provide cannon fodder for us to carry on with our rule. It was really as simple as that. The Iwans underneath, so the Iwans happen to be Muslim. They come from the Punjab, the frontier region. I'm related to the Iwans. Right there at the bottom there. That's why they're better looking than the rest of them. And then we have the Jats. So So the Jats are the lower to middle peasantry, and they happen to be Hindu, Sikh and Muslim, and they actually form the backbone of the British Indian Army. The total number of soldiers that were recruited into the British Indian Army was approximately 1.3 to about 1.5 million. This is a very nice picture of that time that has been colorized, and you can see, I'm not sure whether the pointer shows, but the soldier at the bottom with the bandolier going across with stripes, the large elongated turban, he's a Sikh, and some of the soldiers at the back with a slightly pointed central piece are Muslim soldiers. However, the Indian Army was made up of a combination of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Gurkhas, and Gurkhas can be Hindus and Shamans, but also some of the other smaller ethnic and religious communities also fought for Britain. In total, of this 1.3 to 1.4 million man army, there were about 400,000 Muslims. The major province in terms of recruitment would be the Punjab. The Punjab in the First World War is made up of about 52% Muslim, okay? And the largest single religious community, or ethnic religious community, happened to be the Punjabi Muslimans, or Muslimans if you want to call them that, or Muslims. And there were 136,000 of them. They were actually singularly greater than the entire Gurkha representation at about 55,000, and the Sikh representation at around 100,000. So the Punjabis actually made a massive contribution. And Punjab was then, of course, made up of Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs, as it is today, but it was undivided at the time. Now, this is an interesting quote from General Sir George Mahmood, who was an officer at the time, and he said that the backbone of the British Indian Army were actually the Punjabi Muslims, because they formed such a large segment of a location that contributed so many men. Where did the majority of these men come from? I'm not sure whether the point is working on that, but maybe I can put it out with my bayonet. Ideal tool to be able to show you exactly where these men were coming from. So if we go up North Jhelum, you can see Jhelum, right? And Rawalpindi just above. These are the two major recruitment areas. I'd be a bit careful of taking pictures and putting it up Twitter, because I also work in counter-extremism. The last thing I want to do is people get a hold of these pictures and don't like me and say that I'm mounting a rebellion being a Muslim in central London against the establishment, although they're miles away somewhere else. But Rawalpindi and Jhelum were the two largest recruitment areas outside of Britain, okay? So it's of no, I think it's of no shock that the Pakistan Army today still recruits from these cities. So that legacy continues. And Pakistan Military GCHQ is also based in Rawalpindi. So once again, the legacy of empire exists. The other areas that are worthy of note here is Kabul. It's now known as Uttar. It was named after a British officer, Kabul, and Pur in Farsi means city of, the city of Kabul. It is now known by its original name, which is Uttar. Now what's interesting is in Britain we have a large Pakistani communities from these areas, Rawalpindi, Jhelum, Uttar, even Kohat. That's when some soldiers came from Peshawar as well, which is slightly further up. And then some of the other areas, like we have communities from Gujranwala and Lahore, which is further here, Sialkot, Lahore is here, Sialkot. So what's interesting is that these communities have come here. And I think that what Tazi Husain is trying to say is that they have a historical link to this country that they're largely unaware of. It's about time that they be given their own memorial, or at least that we raise funds for our own memorial like the Sikhs have done. And we haven't been very active in doing it. Right. The next slide here is of a World War I Indian recruitment poster, and it reads Rupaya Bandook Kon Lega Wohi Jo Fauj Mein Bharti Hoga. Basically saying that who will take the money and who will take the gun, only that individual who will sign up for the army. Now, there is a misnomer that the men that fought for Britain were fighting, that they were all fighting as volunteers. Volunteers in this context would mean that someone who simply signs up and is willing to sign up at a signpost, that's a volunteer, okay? It doesn't mean that he's doing it for free and he's not taking any money in return. He's going to get paid, but it's going to be drastically less than his white counterpart. Now, some of these soldiers were actually forced to fight. There was forced conscription that took place. My uncle was kidnapped in World War II, 16 years old. He was studying at Lahore in one of the schools, and my grandfather didn't see him for 4 years. He was a prisoner of war. The Japanese had mistreated him. He returned back to his father with post-traumatic stress disorder. So there were many like that. And in the First World War, there were some very, very young boys as well. In the Second World War, there were boys as young as 14 and 15 who'd been dragged away from their families. So I'm sure that there would have been a similar situation in World War I. I have some of the pictures, but I haven't done the research around young recruits. There's also, I think that it's also worth noting that whilst most of them were fighting actually for money, they were asked a question. There's a very important question, is why are you fighting? And they said bhuk or shok. Bhuk meaning, of course, you know, hunger, and shok as in a sense of adventure. You know, for young men expressing themselves through their physicality is you know, we have this issue since time immemorial. We have this misunderstanding even today that young men who go and fight in Syria are just out and out terrorists. Well, they might be according to British terrorist legislation. However, on a humanitarian index, some of these young men have gone for adventure, but also because they want to save innocent life. There's no doubt about that. However, for some bizarre reason, they're just outcast as terrorists, which is a very simple kind of classification when you have a political agenda in place that unfortunately discriminates. Now, this is the individual who's responsible for the forced conscription in the Punjab, and he wasn't very much liked even by British officials. His name is Lieutenant Governor of the Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer. He was actually quite despised. So let me read the quote to you, which is from a book. And the book is Indian Voices of the Great War, written by David Amissi from Hull University. So let me read it to you. It's actually in regards to recruitment. So from 1916, various forms of coercion were also used to secure recruits. The government of India discussed conscription but preferred to employ informal methods of compulsion, especially in the Punjab. Indian officials were told to produce a given quota of men on pain of losing their posts if they failed. Some men were simply kidnapped or their womenfolk held hostage until the men enlisted. After the war, the authoritarian governor of Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer, was even accused of using terrorist methods to find recruits. Terrorist methods, can you believe that? I thought that was a word only reserved for Muslims. But in the end, he won the libel and he wasn't prosecuted, which of course is of no surprise. So this idea that the Indian Army was entirely voluntary is a misconception. It's actually not true. Right, going with the next picture, and I know that Tazi mentioned the Baloch Regiment. This is a picture of the 129th Baloch Regiment that was the first non-British unit to help British soldiers on the Western Front. They're all armed here with a standard rifle. This is the Enfield Rifle 303. It's very popular amongst Pathan elders who were using it in the war against Russia, and they're actually known to have stolen these bolt actions. So when Indian soldiers were stationed in the frontier, what the Pathans would do at night was literally creep up on them and nick their rifles, because they were really very impressed by the bolt action, that they could then substitute that onto their Jizayals and use them on the British. But then they thought, why do we need to rob the bolt actions? Just rob the rifles. But what the Indians then started to do was actually handcuff the weapons either to their leg or the hand. So the Pathans would come in the middle of the night with their little saws and saw through, in the hope that they wouldn't wake up the soldier, because if they ever did, and he raised alarm with the rest of the unit, he'd get his head kicked in. So naturally, they'd sent the most daring Pathan to try and retrieve one of these rifles. So this is an original that's about 100 years old. It's been refurbished. The bullet fired out of this is a 7.62mm round. It travels around a mile in just under 2 seconds. So remarkably quick. If you were to be shot in the body with one of these, then there isn't really much hope. But in the arm and the leg, probably have to amputate pretty quickly. I brought an amputation sword just in case anyone doesn't get shot by accident. This here is the bayonet, by the way. So this is how you would attach it to the rifle. There you go. So that's the bayonet with the rifle itself. You know, I mean, it's a pretty big piece of kit. I mean, if I was fighting in the trenches, I know what I would do with this. I would probably use it as a pole vault, go straight over the German line of defence and run off into the bushes somewhere. I know that I might survive if I was to use that tactic. Right, so the first unit that sees action for Britain is actually a Muslim unit. It is made up of predominantly Muslim soldiers from the Punjab and the frontier of Pakistan, and from within their ranks, Khudadar Khan here becomes the first Indian Victoria Cross winner. He happens to be a Rajput from Chakwal, I think it's district Jhelum at the time, and the reason he wins Britain's highest medal for bravery is because he's able to hold back a German machine gun post long enough for British reinforcements to arrive. This is also, I suppose, another important picture to look at is the Battle of Ypres was also very, very important. There were 4 battles in total. I think Indians participated in all of them. This is an Indian charge on a German trench, and you can see that the front lines are being decimated. The British soldiers or the officers would often lead the Indians into these type of circumstances. So there was a high casualty list among British officers. So what we see during this process is the Indianization of the Indian Army. We see more and more Indians now being trained as officers. This is a picture of the second Victoria Cross winner, Mir Dast. I believe he was an Afridi from the northwest frontier. And what Mir Dast did was he ran out on the battlefield, collected the bodies of British and Indian soldiers and brought them back to British trenches. They were told not to do that because they risked being killed, of course. But they just never listened, because for them it was a concept of izzat and honour, not leaving their men out in the battlefield to die in shame. So he was also awarded a Victoria Cross. There were 3 Muslims in total who, out of a total of I think 12 Victoria Crosses were awarded to Indians. 3 went to Muslims. 6 went to Hindus. That's a phenomenal number. 2 to Gurkhas. I think 1 was a British officer, but no Sikhs received the Victoria Cross. This is an account from a Pathan soldier who's out there fighting on the Western Front. You can see from the picture there of the landscape that the trees have been completely decimated, the earth has been turned upside down. So let me read the quote to you. The fighting was going on with great violence when our army attacked. 600 guns fired for 35 minutes. The very earth shakes, then our men advance, just like a turnip is cut into pieces or a man is blown to bits by the explosion of a shell. In some places, our trenches are only 200 yards from the enemy, in others, only 100. Day and night there is a rain of shells, no account is taken of the dead. There are heaps of them in the trenches. All those who came with me have all ceased to exist. It is like the destruction of the world. So Muslim soldiers facing exactly the same bullets as British soldiers and Hindus and Sikhs and so many others fighting for Britain. So why is there, and why was there discrimination against these people when they came to Britain? And why is it that today that we still hear, and I hear this, I just heard this yesterday, all these foreigners coming to Britain, my grandfather fought for Britain. I mean, you know, someone obviously wasn't taught something in history. The history lessons went wrong somewhere. The British establishment didn't put it in the syllabus and then wonder why cohesion isn't working. But there you go. It's not rocket science, is it? I mean, let me just put it in context for you. So we fought for Britain when we didn't have to. We were promised independence that was reneged. We were happy to hand over our resources and our money for an empire that had governed us and subjugated us. And whilst we come here to rebuild your country, you're asking us what we've done for it. I mean, who's drunk? Clearly not me. Brighton Pavilion. This is where a number of Indian soldiers have been brought over from the Western Front because they've been badly injured. In the picture on the left, you can see that some of them are remarkably young men. This here is a picture of the Singapore Rebellion. A number of Indian, mainly Muslim soldiers, are refusing to fight fellow Muslim soldiers in Mesopotamia. That becomes a graveyard for the Indian soldiers. And because they've rebelled against their British officers, who actually there was a history of, it was a bad history between them. The British officers didn't treat them very well. So a rebellion takes place, which is as a natural consequence, and 36 mutineers are executed. The next war that I suppose needs to be mentioned, so I mentioned the Western Front, but the Middle East is where the majority of Indians will fight. 675,000 will participate over a period of about 3.5 years. And it is difficult for Muslim soldiers because they're fighting against fellow Muslims, and these are the fellow Muslim soldiers, the Ottoman soldiers. You know, so some of them refused to fight, some of them walked back, some of them were killed at close range because they refused to take orders and they were worried about this then causing issues in the ranks of other units. Then there's the important story of Palestine being handed over to the British. So let me read this to you. On the picture on the left, the mayor of Jerusalem, Hussein Salim al-Husseini, on 9 December 17, delivers the Ottoman governor's letter surrendering the city to Brigadier General Watson. And on the picture on the right, that's Allenby walking through as a conqueror 2 days later, so 11 December 1917. And I think this is a very telling but disturbing and upsetting letter that is written by the Ottomans to the British. Due to the severity of the siege of the city and suffering that this peaceful country has endured from your heavy guns, and for fear that these deadly bombs will hit the holy places, we are forced to hand over to you the city through Hussein al-Husseini, the mayor of Jerusalem, hoping that you will protect Jerusalem the way we have protected it for more than 500 years. So just to quickly recap is that the Sykes-Picot Agreement takes place, the carving up of the Middle East. That of course leads into even the current problems that we're having in the Middle East. You cannot disassociate and disconnect what Britain and France has done in the Middle East to what's currently happening there today. We cannot. For which reason Alawites, who are led by Bashar al-Assad, this is the direct consequence of French rule, where a minority rule a majority. But just to recap, the overall contribution by Armistice Day, 11 November 1918, where all guns are now put to an end, or at least they've stopped, is that there's been about 1.3 million Indian soldiers who fought, over 100,000 Indian battle casualties, 74,000 dead, two largest recruitment areas, Rawalpindi and Jhelum, from Pakistan. Britain has taken £479 million from the Indians for their war. And then you have people complaining today, we don't like these immigrants because they're on the dole. £50 on the £479 million over 4 years. Can you imagine how much that would be today? Billions of pounds. And the worst thing was that many Indians were promised independence, and then as soon as the war is over, Britain reneges on it and turns its back on the Indians for fighting its war. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. So before I open it to the audience, I just want to remind that inshallah we'll do Maghrib at 8:15. So should be in at 8, but we have sort of about half an hour given we are in London. So I think we'll stop around 8:15 and then we'll pray then, and then I think Jahan has to leave, but Tazi should be around if you want to have discussions, and obviously amongst yourself as well. Any questions from the audience? What do you guys ponder some of the questions around this? Let me sort of be a bit more challenging, if I may. Because you know, so I started talking about potentially my father fought with the French and so forth. But you know, frankly, when I see every day, I see a lot of issues, right? Like I work around Charing Cross, and just today I saw hundreds of homeless people on the street, and all these issues. And I wonder, as much as it's fascinating to learn about this history and to learn about all these Muslims that fought for various powers, and we can discuss the ethics of that and so forth. But even just on a more practical level, I mean, these memorials cost money. Like, frankly, why, if I'm being too direct, why do I care? Why do I want a memorial that's going to cost 100 grand where there's so many other people suffering where we can spend the money on? I mean, it's great to learn it, and I can read it in the book, and there's plenty of stuff written about military history, but do I need sort of a big marble thing to remind me that one of my ancestors died in a war and I should pray for them, whenever I supplicate?
Do you want to answer that?
I think you answered it by reminding us, Jahan, that there are countless descendants of these very men. And I think it's important, firstly, that we honor these men, because these descendants will necessarily feel proud of them. Secondly, we have to, I think, inform the ordinary man on the street as to the contribution that Muslims have not got a very good name at the moment. But there's a better history behind all this. And I really do think, yes, I think we ought to honor them. And more than that, I think inform the general public of all this contribution, which has been forgotten.
And you think that a memorial is sort of the right way to do that in some of our...
I think it's one of many different ways. You know, this can be tackled through changing the syllabus, by having projects, by having a memorial that will have like media attention, the right type of media attention, because at the moment the only media attention we get is that we're terrorists, extremists, groomers, fraudsters, thugs, the drug dealers.
All these things are funny.
Yeah. So it's about time we kind of reverse some of those misconceptions and misportrayals by something that is linked to Britain. Because this being an imperial country, at least the legacy still continues, is that if you've served in the armed forces, it's the ultimate form of patriotism and loyalty. However, Muslims, I think, went beyond the normal call of loyalty and patriotism because they're fighting for a subjugator. So if we were to do a comparison, we could actually argue that they were fighting for the freedom of a country that refused them freedom, and now their descendants are living here. Surely they're worthy of some respect. So I think that's why it's important.
But does that suggest that sort of to legitimize our presence, we have to use the past? Or
yeah,
it should be just based on the present.
The thing is, you see, there's a timeline to that, to understand the timeline. So we've fought, we've helped rebuild the industry. We have a large number of Muslims in the NHS and dentists who are saving lives on a regular basis. So we could have a timeline to it, but I think history is important because most people who seem to have this kind of Islamophobic tendency fail to recognise that these people have fought for their freedoms and values. I mean, nobody wakes up an extremist or a racist or even a terrorist. Is that Muslims have lived in Britain for over 100 years, so they were fighting for Britain's security at one point. Yes. All of a sudden now they're just bad people, like they have bad DNA. But they were okay yesterday, but they're not today. Yeah. So therefore, the history is really important. Yeah.
Thank you. I can keep questions, but I see a question in the audience. I'll take one there, then I'll come to the gentleman there. One question, please.
Not a question of observation, but sure. It's important to make an observation of this. Jahan made a very interesting comment about the recruitment of Alawites, who were a bit like the Indian untouchables, by the way, in the Ottoman region. Very interesting point. And he said very interestingly that in fact this use of these minorities is actually there's a consequence, blowback, which is now the result. The same thing happened with British. British recruited the Kurds in Iraq and also the Shia. They didn't recruit the Sunnis. This was again playing divide and rule. The problem in this discussion, and this is related to this discussion, is that actually the Muslim trope should be avoided. This is primarily Punjabis and Pathans. This doesn't involve any of it. I'm Bengali. We're not involved. In fact, we paid for it. We paid their salaries. They don't. Punjab was actually getting richer from our resources because these guys were getting paid and they were getting 3 meals a day. So this was, by the way, the recruitment policy had also a lot to do with giving them out of their poverty as well. 1/4 of the entire Sikh adult population was desperate to be recruited, and they were recruited. 1/4 of the entire Sikh population, adult population. So this was desperation for 3 meals a day, 11 rupees, I believe, 11 rupees.
Yeah.
This was a huge amount of money, by the way. And if these guys died, their families got an amount, right? So this, for a poverty-stricken, impoverished population, this was a boom. So this idea of Islam, is the Persian term, I think you as North African probably wouldn't know. Actually, it's complete nonsense.
Yeah.
This is being foisted at the moment as a trope, again, another trope. It's got nothing to do with it. These are poor, impoverished peasants who are hungry.
So sorry, I'm just trying to get to your point. So it's your point that it's just a job,
no,
right?
The point I was making with the Alawites is that this use of these minorities, by the Pakistan army in 1947 But believe it or not, 1/3 of the entire army, Indian army, in 1947 became the Pakistan army. These were primarily Punjabis, Pathans, and also Hazaras. These were shared by who the British had recruited. I mean, there's a fascinating history behind the Hazaras as well. How they were suddenly being trained up, you know, in Balochistan. They were being taught in Balochistan to be trained up, to become, and the British had hoped that when Pakistan came into being, Pathans would eventually become the rulers of Pakistan. That's another story. But the point is, this trope about Muslims, this monument to Muslims and how Muslims were involved in the British Army, actually is complete nonsense. Because we as Bengali, who paid for this, we were the exchequer paying for these guys, these Pathans and Punjabis, right? Got no monument at all. Yet we're the ones who paid for the Second World War and the First World War.
Can I get to our speakers to give a response? If you give me a second.
This has nothing to do with Muslim trope. It should be avoided. They should have a monument to Punjab. Fine.
I just want to give them a chance to respond to you.
Fine.
If you don't mind. Either of you want to take this
on that point.
It seems like everyone paid for this.
Yeah, Muslims.
We should have nothing to do with Muslims.
But you see, the thing is, the majority of recruitment may have happened in the Punjab and the frontier in regards to Muslims, but
and we paid for it in 1971.
But Muslims.
And the Baluchis are paying right now.
Please.
Yeah.
This huge problem.
Well, the thing is, the Muslim soldiers were also recruited from parts of northern India today, like Hyderabad and so forth. There was a Hyderabad.
Very, very small.
Yeah, smaller in comparison. But still Muslims from these areas. Even if you look at the Bengali contribution in the Second World War, for instance, merchant navy, okay, there's a large number of people who served
40,000.
Right, and they also served in the army. They were much less than the Punjabis, but nonetheless, there were people from Bangladesh.
We don't want your monument. We want a Punjabi Muslim monument. Hang on to it. Let's not have a Muslim monument. This trope should not be allowed.
I'm not forcing you to take it.
So don't use the word Muslim.
But they're still Muslim.
Just listen to his opinion the same way we listen to your observation.
Because what you're trying to do is, you're trying to categorise Punjabi Muslims being separate to Muslims.
Absolutely.
Right? But that's kind of, wouldn't that be going against the kind of Islamic understanding of what a Muslim is? I mean, a Muslim ultimately is a Muslim. And whilst we sit whilst we sit here, we also need to accept that my uncle was forced to fight. He didn't want to fight. He was kidnapped and he fought. Not everyone in the Indian Army fought from a voluntary kind of basis. Now, that has to be recognised. The only reason that we believe, well, no, there are multiple reasons why we believe the memorial to be important. One of them is to try and challenge the backlash that we're currently facing.
Which is Punjabis and Pathans. Nothing to do with us. None of this trope has anything to do with us.
So merchant navies were serving the British Empire.
Sorry, we'll have a separate thing for ourselves.
But
we have nothing. You have nothing to do with us.
No, but the merchant navy was supporting the soldiers.
I'm sorry, this is separate. We pay for
it.
Please keep quiet.
No, but look, I'm asking you seriously. If you could just answer the merchant.
Because this has got nothing to do with
question.
Sir, can you please just give us 2 minutes of your response to you? Because there are other people who have questions that we need to break.
The merchant navy was part of the British Empire, okay? What are these Bengalis doing? They are, no, just 1 minute. No, we can't leave you out because you fought for Britain. You played a role in Britain and you're saying, leave you out. How can I do that?
We are organising our own thing.
So why didn't you just say that we're going to organise our own memorial, you Punjabis have your own memorial?
You have your, don't call it Muslim.
Okay, I'm going to do my own one too.
What should we call it?
I'm going to move to the second question. Sorry guys. I'm sorry, Jahan. I'm going to have to leave it there. The gentleman there had his hand up. I want to allow you.
Yes, go ahead, sorry.
Very
We got a bit colourful.
situation. But what I find is this class ignorance by the local English and British people. Unaware about the contributions, you see. Even recently, the commemoration of the First World War, another thing, a documentary on BBC. Not much light was given by the both Muslim and Hindu contribution to the success of the. And I think somebody mentioned about the syllabus. You see, I think even our young people, our own young people, are not aware about our contribution. And I think there's something, syllabus is wrong, that we should impress upon those who are drafting the syllabus, both here as well as back home, you see. about our contribution as such. And unless this is done, this sacrifice given by Indo-Pak, you see, contribution will be ignored.
Thank you, sir. I don't think that requires a response. We'll see if somebody has a question in particular. I think you had at the back, your hand first, and then come back to you, sir.
Just in reference to the other gentleman.
Oh no! Keep going. I'm joking.
My grandfather and great uncle served in the First World War, 1914 to 1918, and they're actually very proud of their contribution. And I'm very, very proud of the contribution that my family have made to the First World War as Muslims, absolutely. But on another point of view, speaking from an educational point of view, that I've always been, so my family history is documented for like thousands of years, and I've always been aware of it. And I know that my grandfather served in the First World War. However, it's not information that is easily available, and it's not something that I was, the Muslim contribution in its stats that I was aware of until very recently. So I agree that it ought to be in the education system, particularly with what's going on post-Brexit and so on and so forth.
Cool, thank you. I'll take a question from you, sir.
Also a proud one, and my family served in World War I and World War II. That's my question. So there's a story about General Allenby when he reached Damascus, that he tapped his sword, or he tapped his foot on Salahuddin's tomb, and said, "We've come back." How true is that?
Yeah, I've read that. So I believe
it is true.
I believe there is some truth in that. Absolutely.
And did it have any effect on? Obviously, it had an effect on morale if the troops knew about that.
Well, I don't think the troops were allowed to know certain things, because there was a worry of a rebellion already. The major campaign for Indians happened in the Middle East. Okay, I think something out of 13 out of 17 British Imperial divisions happened to be Indian, and they were seriously worried about a rebellion. So much so that they actually went to the Indian subcontinent and looked for scholars who could give a counter fatwa to the Ottoman Sultan, who gave a fatwa of jihad against the British, right? So that's how desperate and worried they were, and that more or less encapsulates the feeling at the time. But something like that wouldn't have been allowed to trickle down among Muslim soldiers because of the fear of a revolt.
I think you find a lot of those Federalists if you dig from both sides. There's quite many of them. Comments or a question?
Question, it's a quick
Please,
one. Being a convert to Islam, just want to know, are there any stories out there about converts to Islam who fought in the wars as well?
Yeah, there is actually, in World War I, there's a really interesting story of a number of British soldiers who were caught in a frenzy and a bloodbath on the Western Front. And they just can't believe that a Christian God could allow anything like this to happen. And they found solace in Islam. They actually became Muslims. I have some of the names and the stories. I know I've got your details, I can forward them on to you.
Interesting.
But it's really interesting on how white converts are leaving Christianity at a time when actually it was still a kind of intensified propaganda against the Ottomans. So it was really at a time in history where you would expect British soldiers in particular not to embrace Islam. However, not a large number, but a number of them actually did become Muslims.
Can I ask if one of our younger audience has a question? No? Okay, prepare one. I'm going to come back to you. Like, you're not going to do that, right? I'm going to close on you, so think of one. The lady at the front.
I wanted to ask, in terms of raising awareness and nurturing an interest in the young diaspora community, what can we do apart from, is it just a matter of changing the curriculum, or is there more that we can do?
I think social media can really help, making small videos of people whose family members have fought. But I think it's important to have a balance. I think that, like with history, my worry is always that we don't want to be kind of pro-colonial and imperial. But the end result, the most important thing is, why is this contribution important? And what can it achieve? And through my work and the work that I've done and the debates that I've had, is that I've managed to challenge people with pretty intense Islamophobic views, and people with intense kind of hatred towards Pakistanis as well. I've been able to do that by delivering a kind of a different alternative to the normal kind of Muslims equals extremist. And this isn't about making myself feel better. It's literally that historical narrative can be used to demystify this understanding of, the Muslim is synonymous with everything evil. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah. I recall the story of a guy who uploaded this onto YouTube. He watched a program that I made for the BBC. It was called Muslim Tommies. After watching that, he seems to have gone on a crusade challenging the EDL and the BNP, saying, right, all you guys that hold Muslims responsible for terrorist acts, you might want to remember that Muslims were fighting against Nazis to try and secure the freedom of this country. So before you start donning those emblems like the swastika, which is kind of ironic in itself, the swastika is a brown man symbol from the Indians. Why would any white extremists or supremacists want to wear a brown man symbol? It's just, it's just crazy. But he went out and did a video on it, and he actually said that Muslims have defended this country from racists and fascists, and that whilst you question their loyalty, you're wearing the symbols of that hate mob that literally tried to bring us to our knees. So I think it was very compelling, and it was amazing that it was coming from not our community, but someone who would literally listen to our story and then decided to kind of disseminate and change the view of members of his own community.
Thanks, John. Can I, Abdul Malik, do you want to plug what you do? I'll give you a minute to plug what you do. I don't know whether this work kind of comes in your tours.
Yeah, my name is Abdul Malik Taylor. I'm the founder of Muslim History Tours, and we look at connections, contributions of Muslims within UK. We look at some of the connections from abroad, but we primarily focus on the Muslim contribution within UK. And we do cover bits and pieces of the war as well. We also cover a part. It's not, I won't say it's totally pro-British and pro-military, but we also cover parts which are like stolen history as well, hidden history.
I just thought this audience would be the kind of audience that would like a tour, so please do speak to Abdul Malik. So do I have my questions so I can close? Go for it.
So after the Indians didn't get their independence, did they put up a big fuss because they fought for the English? How did they end up getting it in the end?
Yeah, they did. There were a number of nationalistic leaders who then started to emerge because of the situation that was left behind after them being devastated and that promise being reneged. And that from the end of the First World War, 1918, it still took another war to take place and for more Indians to be exploited and the Bengal famine to happen, where millions of people from the Bengal province die, where 2.5 million Indians fight for Britain, 87,000 lose their lives, over 150,000 battle casualties. The war cost India well over £1.3 billion. So, unfortunately, they were exploited again. The only reason that India actually becomes independent is because Britain realises that it can no longer control this part of the world because of the situation that it's left in after the Second World War, the economic decline, and the fact that so the economic decline and the fact that the Indians were now beginning to rebel and revolt in large numbers across the country, and they realised that it was about time that these people left.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things, much of my younger days, I did not pay much attention to history, and I actually started learning futurology. How do you predict what's going to happen in the future? And obviously, as you start to get slightly older, you start to learn more about, you get interested in the past. Recently, I read a book, not particularly because of my heritage, I'm of Algerian descent, but Amir Abdelkader, who founded Algeria. And one of the things that a lot of people knew, but I didn't, is that when he was sent by the French to Damascus, and then there was the attack on all of the Christians, he actually took in thousands into his home and saved lots of them, which is again putting it in today's context and what's happening, sort of Muslims killing other Muslims and non-Muslims. It just sort of, there are examples in there for a lot of us to learn from. So I'm really grateful that you've joined us this evening to share with us a lot of the things that we don't know. I feel hopefully I speak for everyone when I say we learned quite a lot. Next week, inshallah, there will not be a talk. City Circle will be taking part in something called the Tour de Salah, so it's like the Tour de France. We're going around 5 mosques, starting from Fajr all the way to Isha, doing 100 kilometers around London on bicycles if you want to join, and raising money for number of organisations, including City Circle. You can speak to Ramiz, the chair of City Circle, if you're interested. Also the website, I think it's tourdesalah.co.uk.com. The week after that, which you should definitely make sure you attend. I've attended some of these talks in the past, spoken one and chaired another. It's about Hajj. Hajj is an incredible experience. A lot of us don't get a chance to go, so it's incredible to hear from people who've been, and it will be with the amazing Peter Saunders, a very different perspective. And then the City Circle needs somebody with editing videos. If any of you are capable of doing that, or would like to have, or know somebody who would like to. With that, shall we thank our speakers and pray not. Thank you.